The street was so quiet in the early evenings that the sound of the tea shop as doorbell seemed to linger in the air like a sigh. It was a small corner building, tucked between a bookstore with foggy windows and a tailor's shop that had closed years ago, but still smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, who appeared every Tuesday at 3:30 and ordered the same pot of jasmine tea. When the shop was empty except for the slow ticking of the clock above the door, a woman in a dove gray coat stepped inside, her gloved hands cradling something small and wrapped in linen. She did not order tea. Instead, she placed the bundle on the counter and said, "This was Marigold's. Now it's yours." He never spoke beyond a murmured thank you. It fit perfectly in her hands. But he always left a single peppermint candy on the saucer. You'll know when the time comes. The shop's windows, usually dark by evening, glowed faintly gold, as if a candle were flickering inside. But when she peered downstairs, the room was empty. The only light came from the teapot, sitting serenely on the counter, its surface shimmering like liquid amber. Then she left, the bell chiming softly behind her, leaving Clara alone with the teapot and the quiet, as if repaying some silent debt. Then there was Lilia, the florist from down the lane, who came in with her sleeves dusted in pollen and her pockets full of petals. She liked chamomile with a drop of cream. Lulled by the scent of bergamot and the distant sound of wind chimes, though she could have sworn she had none hanging outside her window, and would sometimes press a sprig of rosemary or a folded paper star into Clara's palm before slipping back into the dusk. The tea shop had no name, at least not one painted on the glass, but the regulars called it Marigold, as after the woman who had run it for decades before vanishing one autumn night, leaving behind only a copper kettle and a shelf of porcelain cups. Now, the shop belonged to Clara. She had arrived in town on a day when the rain fell not in drops, but in whispers, softening the cobblestones and blurring the edges of the world. Steam curled from spouts in lazy spirals. The honey dripped from its spoon like golden thread. Even the light moved differently here, spilling through the windows in thick, buttery pools that made the air seem to hum. Clara learned quickly that no one came to Marigold's in a hurry. They came to sit, to stare into their cups, to let the quiet settle around them like a well-worn shawl. The apartment above the shop had been empty for years, its windows dusty but intact, its floors sloping gently toward the hearth like they were waiting for someone to lean into their warmth. Clara signed the lease that very afternoon, her suitcase barely unpacked before she found herself standing behind the tea shop as counter the next morning, as if she had always been there. The shop was a place of slow rhythms. Her first regular was an elderly man named Mr. Finch, but the most curious visitor arrived on a Thursday. Clara unfolded the cloth to find a teapot, not porcelain or cast iron, but something smoother, warmer, like a stone worn by the sea. "How does it work?" Clara asked. The woman smiled, but only with her eyes. That night, as Clara climbed the stairs to her apartment, she noticed something odd. Clara did not question it. Some things she was learning were meant to be steeped in silence. She slept deeply that night, lulled by the scent of bergamot and the distant sound of wind chimes, though she could have sworn she had none hanging outside her window. The next morning, Clara woke to the scent of rain-soaked earth and something else, something warm and faintly floral, like steam rising from a cup of freshly steeped tea, and padded downstairs. The teapot still sat on the counter where she'd left it, but now a thin curl of steam rose from its spout. Though the stove was cold and the kettle empty, Clara hesitated, then reached out and touched the pot's smooth surface. It was warm, but not scalding, the kind of warmth that seeped into your palms on a winter afternoon. Their scent mingled with the tea, sweet and green. "Everyone in this town knows about Marigold's teapot," she said, "but no one's seen it in years." She reached out, her fingertips brushing the pot's rim. "She used to say it brewed what you needed, not what you asked for." She opened her eyes to find sunlight pooling on her quilt in soft, golden patches, and for a moment she lay perfectly still. "You'll see." The air softened. Customers who usually ordered black tea with milk found themselves asking for herbal blends instead. "Mr. Finch," for the first time in memory, but she didn't need to. The teapot hummed faintly on the counter. Some questions didn't need answers, some things just were. Its warmth seeping into the wood, into the air, into the hands of everyone who passed through the door. Set aside his jasmine and sipped instead at a cup of something spicy and amber-colored, his eyes drifting shut as he drank. A young mother, her baby asleep in a sling across her chest, wept silently into a mug of rosehip and honey, then laughed, wiping her cheeks. "I don't know why I'm crying," she admitted. "It just feels like something's loosened." The steam thickened. Lelia stood in the doorway, her arms full of sprigs of eucalyptus and early lilacs. She noticed the shop's windows were glowing again, softer this time, like candlelight seen through closed eyelids. She paused, listening. From below came a sound like a sigh, like the whisper of a cup being set gently on a saucer, their purple buds still tight. She paused on the threshold, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the steam curling from the teapot, the way the light seemed to gather around Clara like a halo, carrying a scent that was not just lavender, not just chamomile, but something richer, bolder, like sunlight on an herb garden at dusk. Clara poured a cup. The liquid was pale gold, almost luminous, and when she lifted it to her lips, the taste was like drinking a memory one she couldn't quite place, but knew was good. Listening to the distant murmur of the town coming awake. Somewhere below, a floorboard creaked, though the shop wouldn't open for hours. She dressed slowly, pulling on a sweater the color of oatmeal. She lifted the lid. Inside, the water was clear, shimmering faintly, as if reflecting light from somewhere deeper than the porcelain. Without thinking, she reached for a tin of loose-leaf tea, a blend of lavender and chamomile she'd brought from her old life, and dropped a pinch into the pot. The leaves swirled once, twice, then sank like falling petals. A sigh seemed to pass through the room. She exhaled, and something inside her unwound, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The shop opened at 9, but today, the bell chimed at 8:30. "You used it," she said, her voice hushed. Clara blinked. "You know about the teapot?" Lilia stepped inside, setting the flowers on the counter. Clara looked down at her cup. "What does that mean?" Lilia only smiled and tucked a lilac behind Clara's ear. The morning passed in a haze of steam and quiet conversation. Clara didn't understand that night as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. Clara smiled and kept climbing. Some questions didn't need answers. Some things just were. The days had begun to fold into one another like well-loved pages in a book, each one soft at the edges and faintly sweet, like the scent of dried chamomile clinging to Clara's sleeves, their wooden slats rattling softly against the glass. At first, she thought he might be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the swaying branches of the old elm outside. But then he stepped forward, and she saw the frayed cuffs of his jacket, the 2 large backpacks sliding off one shoulder, the way his fingers twisted together as if trying to wring out the silence. The teapot, now a permanent fixture on the counter, where the chair legs didn't scrape against the floorboards. He slid into the seat, his backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. Seemed to settle into the rhythm of the shop as if it had always been there. It was heavier than usual, its weight solid and reassuring in her hands. When she poured, the liquid that spilled out was a deep mossy green, shimmering with tiny flecks of gold, as if someone had steeped the forest floor at dawn. Clara asked, leaning back against the counter to give him space. The scent was crisp and cool, like crushed mint and young pine needles. But underneath it lay something warmer, earthier, the smell of damp soil after a summer rain, of tree roots cradling secrets. Sort of. His thumb rubbed at a knot in the wooden table. Some mornings, Clara would wake to find it already warm to the touch, its surface humming faintly under her fingertips. The teapot, which had been still a moment ago, released a thin curl of steam, barely visible in the early light. Then another. His shoulders, which had been hunched somewhere near his ears, began to relax. He didn't cry. He didn't thank her. She noticed a small, smooth stone on the doorstep. It fit perfectly in her palm, still warm from someone's pocket. But when he left, half an hour later, the cup of Earl Grey was empty, and the smudge on his cheek had been wiped away. His fingers uncurled slightly around the cup. Clara didn't question it. Clara didn't say she was sorry. She didn't ask how or when or why. She simply reached for the tin of Earl Grey, measured a spoonful into a fresh cup, and added a drizzle of honey from the jar Lilia had brought her the week before, thick and golden, with the scent of wildflowers still clinging to it, as if it had been busy in the night brewing something just beyond the edge of understanding. It was on one such morning, a day when the air tasted of rain not yet fallen, and the clouds hung low like gauze over the town, that the boy arrived. He came in just as Clara was lifting the blinds. She turned instead to straightening the jars behind the counter, giving him room to breathe. The quiet stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like waiting not for something to happen, but for something to settle. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, and a smudge of dirt marked his cheekbone like a misplaced freckle every morning before work. The way one might watch a deer at the edge of a clearing. What kind did he like? He said it helped him think. I don't have any money. The words came out in a rush. The first cup's always free here. It wasn't a rule she'd written down or even thought of before this moment. That the words felt true as soon as they left her lips, as if the shop itself had whispered them to her, as if he'd been holding them in for blocks. He hovered near the doorway, his gaze darting from the teapot to the empty chairs, then back to Clara, as if calculating the distance to an exit. He couldn't have been more than 12. The way one might speak to a startled bird. You can sit anywhere you like. Clara kept her voice low. The boy swallowed. Something in the air shifted. That's all right, she said, smoothing her apron. She hadn't planned to say it. The boy hesitated, then edged toward the table nearest the window, the one where the light was gentlest. Clara lifted the teapot. She set the cup in front of the boy. I don't like tea, he muttered, eyeing it with suspicion. Clara smiled. This one might be different. He took a tentative sip. What's your name? Elliot. Do you live nearby, Elliot? A shrug. Clara didn't press. After a long moment, Elliot spoke again, his voice softer now. My dad used to drink tea. Clara nodded, keeping her movement slow, her attention just slightly averted. Earl Grey, with honey. Elliot's throat worked. He's gone now. The words hung in the air between them, fragile as the steam curling from the teapot. She said it in front of Elliot. For later, she said. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and something in his face shifted, like a curtain lifting in a breeze. That night, as Clara turned the sign on the door from open to closed, she placed it on the windowsill where the moonlight could reach it. The stone remained on the windowsill, its smooth surface collecting sunlight during the day and condensation at night. Clara found herself touching it often, when she measured tea leaves in the morning, when she wiped down the counter in the slow hours between lunch and dusk. It was warm, always warm, as if it carried someone's body heat, even when the shop stood empty. Lilia noticed it first, of course. This town remembers its children, especially the ones who leave gifts. She placed the stone back on the sill with deliberate care. His father used to come here, always sat in that corner. And for the first time, she felt something beneath its warmth, a pulse, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. He didn't come in. He stood outside the window, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against a wind that wasn't blowing. He didn't speak as Clara brought over a cup something dark and rich this time, with a scent like wood smoke and distant thunder. He drank it slowly, his fingers curled tight around the porcelain. When he was done, he set the cup down with exaggerated care, as if afraid it might shatter. But when he lifted his hand, Clara saw the same tremor Lilia had described. She reached for the teapot instinctively, pouring a cup of something strong and unsweetened. Clara watched him through the glass as she wiped down tables, giving him space to decide. After 10 minutes, he pushed open the door. She nodded toward the table where Elliot had lingered the week before. When she woke, the teapot was cold, and the stone on the windowsill glowed faintly like a captured star. Drank his tea black as midnight, never said a word. But his hands shook less when he left. She came in on a Thursday, her arms full of late-blooming asters, their purple petals edged with the first hints of autumn gold. She set the flowers on the counter and reached for the stone without asking, turning it over in her fingers like she was reading its history. "Elliot," she said simply. Clara paused, the teapot halfway to a customer's cup. "You know him?" Lelia smiled, tucking an aster behind her ear. The wood there was slightly darker than the rest, as if it had absorbed years of quiet. "What happened to him?" Clara looked at the table. Lelia said, arranging the asters in a vase by the register. "One morning, he just didn't wake up. Same thing that happens to most people who work too hard and sleep too little." The teapot shuddered on the counter, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Clara touched its side out of habit. That afternoon, Elliot returned. "I brought money this time," he said, dropping a handful of coins on the counter. They were warm from his palm. Clara slid them back toward him, first cup still free. The teapot, without prompting, began to steam. Elliot sat at his father's table. "It tastes like him," he whispered. Clara, who had never met the man, somehow knew exactly what he meant. That night, she dreamed of a figure standing in the shop as doorway, a man with Elliot's stubborn chin and tired eyes. He didn't speak. The man in her dream took one sip, then smiled. When Clara awoke with a start, the teapot sat cold on her knitstand, and the stone on the windowsill shone brighter than before, like a tiny star brought down to earth. The first frost came quietly in the hour before dawn, painting the cobblestones with delicate silver brushstrokes. Clara woke to find her window laced with crystalline patterns, their fragile geometry catching the pale pink light of morning. Downstairs, the teapot sat waiting, its surface already beaded with condensation that shimmered like scattered stars. Lilia arrived earlier than usual, her boots leaving damp prints on the floorboards. She carried no flowers today. Instead, her arms were full of dried lavender bundles tied with twine, their fragrance spicing the chilled air. She said by way of greeting, shaking silver blonde hair from her eyes. "The plants know it first, the roots tighten. The sap slows." She arranged the lavender along the windowsill, their purple buds now faded to soft gray. "The teas will be different today. Frost changes everything." Today he carried something in his cupped hands, a smooth black stone, larger than the first, with a single white vein running through it like a lightning bolt. He set it carefully beside its companion on the windowsill before sliding into his usual seat. When she lifted it, the scent that rose was sharper than yesterday wood ear, with a crisp note like frozen rosemary. He drank it slowly, the note read, in shaky handwriting, "Tell Elliot, the stones by the river remember everything." His expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to something softer. When he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper, worn at the edges from handling. When she woke, her fingers were curled around nothing, but the scent of cloves and frozen earth lingered in the air. The two stones on the sill glowed faintly, one warm white, one cool black, their light pulsing in perfect rhythm with the teapot's quiet hum. Clara touched the teapot's lid. It was warmer than the room, humming faintly beneath her fingers. His usual Tuesday arrival timed perfectly with the clock's chime at 3:30. On the back was a rough sketch of the tea shop sign. What poured out was a rich amber liquid studded with whole cloves, its steam carrying whispers of cinnamon and orange peel, all drawn by some unspoken understanding that today's tea would be special. The young mother came, her baby now bundled in a knitted cap the color of cranberries. Lelia served her a cup of something rose-pink that smelled like candied hibiscus. The mother's shoulders relaxed as she drank, her eyes closing briefly in relief. Mr. Finch held the cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep into his knuckles. "My wife," he said suddenly, his voice rough with memory. "She used to make mulled wine on the first frost. Stuck cloves and oranges and hung them by the fire." He took a slow sip. "This tastes like coming home." But today, instead of his standard jasmine, he inhaled deeply and said, "Something with spice, I think." Mr. Finch was their first customer. The teapot seemed to agree. By mid-afternoon, the shop had filled with the quiet murmur of regulars. Elliot arrived as the light was turning golden, his breath making small clouds in the air. He no longer hesitated at the door. The teapot needed no prompting. It poured Elliot a deep russet brew that swirled with tiny currents, as if stirred by an invisible hand. "Found this in his coat pocket," Elliot said, pushing it across the table. Clara turned the paper over. Outside, the wind picked up, sending a shower of golden leaves past the window. That night, Clara dreamed of a riverbank where the stones shone like constellations, and a man with Elliot's eyes pressed a steaming cup into her hands. That night, Clara dreamed of a riverbank where the stones shone like constellations, and a man with Elliot's eyes pressed a steaming cup into her hands. The stones glowed brighter as the days grew shorter, their light pulsing in time with the shop's quiet rhythms. By November's end, dusting the cobblestones in the hour before dawn, Clara woke to find her window laced with frost feathers, their delicate patterns catching the lamplight like lace. Downstairs, the teapot was already warm to the touch, its surface beaded with condensation that shimmered like scattered stars. She traced a finger along its curve, feeling the now familiar hum beneath the porcelain, a vibration that had grown stronger since the stones appeared. Nearly gold in the lamplight, and her gloves were stained at the fingertips tea leaves. "You kept the lavender alive," Avellini said, nodding to the dried bundles hanging near the hearth. "She always said you had the touch." It had gone almost too warm to hold. "I was her apprentice for 7 years," she said, tracing the rim of the black stone, "before she got changed." A sound almost below, hearing 3 notes harmonizing into something that resonated in Clara's ribs. The teapot trembled violently, its lid rattling as Aveline reached into her satchel. Outside, the wind picked up, sending a flurry of snowflakes against the window panes, its surface shimmering with heatless light. "You knew Marigold?" And Elliot stumbled in, his cheeks pink from the cold and his jacket dusted with snow. Aveline said, withdrawing a 3rd stone, this one deep blue and translucent like ice over a winter lake. The hearth crackled, and for a moment, Clara could have sworn she saw a 4th shadow beside it, a woman's shape. She turned to Clara, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Shall we see what they remember? There and gone like steam." Aveline exhaled slowly, her gold eyes reflecting the stone's glow. When she placed it beside the others, their lights intertwined, casting prismatic patterns across the ceiling. The shop seemed to hold its breath. He froze when he saw Aveline, his gaze darting to the stones. "They're singing," he blurted, his voice hushed with wonder. "Perhaps, or something darker." She went straight to the windowsill, her breath catching as she hovered a hand over the stones. "You have them," she whispered, her voice rough with something like reverence. They had become as much a part of the tea shop as the scent of bergamot or the way the floorboards creaked near the hearth. Customers would glance at them, Elliot's black stone with its lightning vein, the smooth white one left by an unknown visitor, but no one questioned their presence. In this town, some mysteries were meant to be steeped in silence. But like someone who had walked through seasons to arrive here, frost clung to the hem of her long wool coat, and her boots left damp prints that evaporated almost instantly on the warm floorboards. There was an air about her, not urgency exactly, but a quiet intensity that made the teapot tremble on its shelf. The first snow came softly. Lilia arrived as Clara was lighting the hearth, her arms full of pine boughs that filled the shop with the scent of winter forests. She paused in the doorway, her sharp eyes noting how the stone's glow brightened at her arrival. "They're listening today," she murmured, arranging the boughs along the mantel with practiced hands. Marigold used to say stones remember everything, even the things we'd rather forget. Clara was about to ask what that meant when the doorbell chimed. The woman who entered carried the cold with her not unpleasantly. Up close, Clara saw the traveler's eyes were an unusual shade of amber. Lilia went very still. "Aveline," she breathed. "Marigold's shadow." Aveline turned, and something unspoken passed between the two women, a recognition that made the pine boughs rustle despite the still air. Clara's fingers tightened around the teapot. Aveline peeled off her gloves, revealing hands marked with thin white scars, the kind left by steam burns or spilled wax. The doorbell chimed again, and they were... She told me to bring this when the time was right. Outside, the snowfall thickened, blanketing the street in silence. Marigold always said the best keepers were chosen, not made. The teapot, without anyone touching it, began to pour. The blue stone settled between its companions with a sound like a sigh, its translucent surface drinking in the firelight. The shop held its breath. Then the teapot stirred without being touched, tilting forward to pour a stream of liquid that defied understanding. Not tea, but something silver and luminous that flowed upward like reverse rain, pooling in the air above the stones to form a shimmering mirror. Aveline extended her scarred hands toward the vision. "Watch," she whispered, her voice catching on the word, then cleared to reveal Marigold standing behind the counter years earlier. The shop walls glowed sunflower yellow in that remembered time. Marigold's voice floated through time, Aveline murmured, more to the memory than to them. The scene shifting to show the tea shop as it stood now empty, yet not empty. Elliot's breath caught. The fire settled into embers, and for one impossible moment, the scent of bergamot and honey swelled through the shop thicker and sweeter than any tea could produce, rich as memory itself. "She's here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden quiet, leaving the three of them standing in the sudden, ordinary light of afternoon. By the hearth, the air shimmered like heat over pavement. Its glow had faded, but warmth radiated from its smooth surface. "Now you understand," she said to Clara. "The shop chose you because some bridges need tending," gradually resolving into the faintest suggestion of a woman's form. One translucent hand reached toward the teapot on its shelf, looking for all the world like an ordinary piece of porcelain. Yet the air still hummed with the echoes of what they'd seen, and the taste of bergamot lingered like a promise. We needed more time, though her lips in the memory didn't move. They're bridges between what is and what could be, between the living and the... Jars of tea leaves stacked precariously high. Marigold looked younger, though her eyes held the same quiet knowing Clara had seen in the portrait left in the apartment upstairs. When his fingers made contact, his eyes widened, but whatever revelation came to him, he kept it to himself, slipping the stone into his pocket with a look of quiet determination. The teapot sat in her hands, already familiar in its curves, already humming with something more than steam. The silver surface rippled, the memory shifted like leaves turning in wind. Now Marigold sat at the small corner. Suddenly they saw Marigold standing in the winter garden behind the shop, snow clinging to her shawl as midnight wrapped around her. The two original stones, black and white, glowed at her feet as she lifted them toward the starless sky. Table, the one Elliot always claimed her work-worn hands cradling a cup as tendrils of steam curled around her face. A younger Aveline sat across from her, scribbling notes in a battered journal, the damp wool of his jacket cold beneath her palm. The stones pulsed erratically now, their light throwing strange shadows across Aveline's face as she stared into the vision, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The teas aren't just leaves and water," the image shuddered. "Take them," she whispered to the darkness, her breath frosting the air, "but leave enough of me to remember." Elliot made a small, wounded sound beside Clara. She realized her fingers had tightened on his shoulder. She wasn't ready. The liquid mirror darkened abruptly. The real teapot rattled in response, its lid trembling. Outside, the wind stilled. Then the silver liquid collapsed back into the stones with a sound like distant chimes. Aveline exhaled shakily and lifted the blue stone. Elliot, unusually quiet, reached for the black stone. The teapot sat waiting on the counter, its surface dull now, looking for all the world like an ordinary piece of porcelain. Yet the air still hummed with the echoes of what they'd seen, and the taste of bergamot lingered like a promise. The days after the stone's revelation passed like watercolors, bleeding into one another's soft edges, blending seasons as autumn deepened its hold on the town. The one that had once held sacks of tea leaves and forgotten ledgers. Each morning, Clara found her at the work table, grinding dried petals with a mortar and pestle, her movements precise as a chemist's. The black stone remained in Elliot's pocket, a constant weight against his thigh. Aveline explained one frost-laced dawn as she measured what looked like crushed amber into a muslin pouch. For when the living need to speak with what lies beyond. She tied the pouch with a red thread, her scarred fingers moving with practiced ease. "They're dangerous if brewed wrong." He went straight to Clara, pulling the black stone from his pocket. It pulsed faintly in his palm. "I'll go with you," she said to Elliot, his fingers curled around the stone, where the houses leaned close together as if sharing secrets. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. Elliot walked with the stone clenched in one fist, his breath making ghostly shapes in the cold. Looking up through the water directly at Elliot. Even through the distortion, Clara recognized the set of those shoulders, the same silhouette that had sat at the corner table drinking midnight dark tea. "He told me to bring this to the river today." Its surface skimmed with the first delicate ice at the edges. "Even the things we forget about ourselves," said, "there's something there I need to see." Then the stone's glow intensified, spreading across the river's surface like spilled ink, revealing shapes beneath the water, not fish or rocks. At its center stood Marigold, her hands outstretched, holding a cup that swirled with both liquid and shadow. The shadow smiled. Clara was certain it smiled, before continuing its slow walk downstream with the others. But shadows of people walking along the riverbed, their forms blurred but unmistakably human. Its lightning vein glowing brighter where his skin touched it. "Steep them too long, and you might not come back. The winter solstice is coming," she said. "The veil thins then, though no fire burned beneath it." Aveline took one look at their faces and wordlessly poured 3 cups of something that smelled like pine needles and honey. "If you're going to the river, take this." The river returned to its ordinary winter stillness. Elliot picked up the stone, now dull and cool, and tucked it back in his pocket. She pressed one of the bridge tea sachets into Elliot's hand. "But don't brew it unless you're certain. And never drink what comes from those waters." While the blue and white stones sat quiet on the windowsill, their glow dimmed but not extinguished. Avelina had taken up residence in the small back room of the shop. Outside, a crow settled on the windowsill, its beady eyes fixed on the stones. She was trying to bring someone back. Not all the way, just enough to say goodbye properly. She shook her head, the morning light catching the silver strands in her dark hair. Some doors only open one way. Marigold called these bridge teas. Clara touched the teapot's handle, still warm from yesterday's last brew. Is that what happened to Marigold? Eveline's hands stilled. Elliot arrived as the first customers were trickling in, his usual quiet energy replaced by something more purposeful. I dreamed about my dad last night, he said, his voice low. Really dreamed him, I mean, not just memories. The teapot rattled on its shelf. Aveline looked up sharply, her golden eyes narrowing. Clara found herself reaching for her coat without deciding to. The path to the river wound through the oldest part of town. He said the stones remember everything, Elliot murmured as they reached the riverbank. The water moved sluggishly. He knelt in the frozen grass and placed the black stone at the water's edge. For a long moment, nothing happened. One shadow paused. Elliot made a sound like a sob and a laugh combined. He reached into his pocket for the tea sachet, but Clara caught his wrist. Remember what Aveline said? She whispered. The moment stretched, fragile as the ice at their feet. Then Elliot nodded and withdrew his empty hand. When the stone's light faded, he's okay, he said softly. Wherever he is, he's okay. The walk back to the tea shop was quiet, their footsteps muffled by the snow beginning to fall. The teapot was steaming when they returned at night. Clara dreamed of a bridge made of teacups, each one glowing with a different colored light. Almost time, she said, though her lips didn't move. The longest night is coming. The winter solstice crept closer, draping the town in ever earlier sunsets that painted the tea shop windows in shades of lavender and deep blue. Clara found herself waking each morning to the scent of snow and something else, something earthy and sweet that clung to the corners of the shop like a half-remembered dream. Holding up a bottle of silver blue liquid that swirled as if alive, their sharp pine scent cutting through the herbal sweetness. She moved through the shop with quiet purpose, weaving the branches into garlands that she draped along the mantel and windows. He asked Clara one afternoon as they folded linen napkins. Marigold, I mean. Fat flakes spiraled past the windows, muffling the world outside. Aveline lit every candle in the shop, their flames casting flickering patterns on the walls. The three stones, black, white, and blue, sat in the center of the largest table, their lights intertwining to form a soft, shimmering pool. That all this would happen, when the clock strikes midnight, the bridge will open, but only for an hour, to light the way when the veil is thinnest. For strength, she said, pressing one into Elliot's hand. Crossing takes more than magic, it takes heart. The steam curling into shapes that almost looked like letters before dissolving. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the building, but inside, the shop felt like the still center of the world. Her scars stood out starkly in the candlelight as she worked. Marigold made them last. She paused halfway up. The shop below glowed with an impossible light, not from candles or fire, but from the stones and the teapot, their radiance pulsing softly through the darkness. The stone's quiet hum following her into dreams of bridges made of teacups and rivers that flowed both ways, will meet every drop. Countless others, their forms blurred but unmistakably present, walking the edges of the world, which had taken to steaming gently whenever the stones were near. I think she hoped, she said. Aveline had transformed the back room into an alchemist's workshop. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, their shadows dancing along the walls in the lamplight. On the long wooden table sat rows of tiny glass bottles filled with liquids of impossible colors, a violet that shimmered like twilight. His black stone now permanently warm in his pocket. He helped Clara polish cups and sort tea leaves, his usual restless energy replaced by a quiet focus. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he'd take out the stone and hold it close to the teapot, watching as their glows pulsed in tandem. A green as deep as forest shadows, she murmured, securing a sprig of holly above the doorway. The red berries glowed like tiny coals against the dark green leaves, They hold the light when everything else lets go. A gold that pulses faintly even in the dark. These are for the crossing, Adeline explained. Laja arrived with armfuls of evergreen boughs. The old ones say evergreens remember summer. Elliot came every day after school. Do you think she knew? Clara glanced at the teapot. On the eve of the solstice, the first true snowstorm arrived. Tomorrow night, Aveline said, placing her hands flat on the table. Lilia brought out a tray of small cakes dotted with candied orange peel. Clara poured cups of spiced chai for everyone. That night, as Clara climbed the stairs to her apartment, she could almost make out shapes moving in that light. A woman with Marigold's posture. A man with Elliot's stubborn chin. Clara blinked, and they were gone. But the scent of bergamot and honey lingered as she finally turned to bed. The stone's quiet hum following her into dreams of bridges made of teacups and rivers that flowed both ways. The longest night of the year dawned crystalline and hushed. Snow had fallen steadily since dusk, wrapping the town in a woolen hush so complete Clara could hear the whisper of flakes settling on the windowsill. The usual tables and chairs stood pushed against the walls, their surfaces draped with linen cloths embroidered with constellations. Their petals were edged with the faintest blush of pink like dawn remembered. Christmas roses, she murmured, placing them at the 4 cardinal points of the circle. They bloom when nothing else dares. From a carved wooden box, she withdrew 7 glass vials filled with liquids that defied ordinary colors, a violet that shifted like storm clouds, a green as deep as forest shadows, a silver that moved like living mercury. One by one, she added 3 drops from each vial to the teapot, whispering words that buzzed against Clara's skin like static. The air grew thick with the scent of thunderstorms and damp earth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the last bloom. Her palms were cool and rough with scars. The moment the circle closed, the candle flame stretched upward into perfect, motionless spears of light. Then mist, revealing ghostly figures moving through the snowbound street, not walking but drifting like smoke toward their circle. Clara recognized Marigold immediately, her posture still regal, silver liquid arched upward in a perfect stream. The words, "Once upon a time," glowing golden in the dark. The man paused at the bridge's edge. His father smiled, the same lopsided grin Elliot wore when solving a difficult math problem, and mouthed something lost to the humming air. Then, with infinite care, he pressed 2 fingers to his lips and extended them toward Elliot in blessing. Outside, the first birds began their dawn chorus. Elliot knelt in the center of the room, his stone clutched to his chest, his father's scarf damp with tears. The teapot sat quietly on the tray, its surface dull but warm, close enough that Clara could see the pattern of his wool coat-brown herringbone, worn at the elbows. Marigold locked eyes with Clara and mouthed 2 words, "Keep pouring." The spirits dissolved like steam rising from a cup, leaving only the scent of roses and snow mold. He reached out, not to touch, but to hover his palm over Elliot's black stone, forming a bridge between their circle and the gathering spirits. Where the droplets fell, tiny lights kindled in the air like fireflies, her silver hair loose around her shoulders like a bridal veil. Elliot's 6-year-old hands struggling with the reel as his father guided them. Both. Behind her came others, an older man with Elliot's stubborn chin and laugh lines etched deep. A woman holding lavender stems that never wilted, a young boy with Aveline's golden eyes but none of her scars. But living moments that filled the circle with scent and sound. The teapot's hum deepened to a resonant chord that vibrated in Clara's molars, in the hollows of her bones. Marigold planted these the winter before she ... changed. In their place, a perfect circle had been cleared and marked with 12 white candles, their flames burning unnaturally still. Evergreen boughs woven with red thread formed the circle's boundary, their pine scent sharp and cleansing. At the precise center sat the 3 stones on a hammered silver tray, Elliot, S. Blackstone, with its lightning vein. The mysterious white stone and Aveline's blue winter stone, their lights pulsing in slow unison like a sleeping heartbeat. The teapot rested beside them, its surface glazed with condensation that caught the candlelight like scattered stars. She woke to find frost flowers blooming across her bedroom window, delicate fractal patterns that glowed blue-white in the pre-dark. Beneath her feet, the floorboards hummed. The teapot was already singing downstairs. He wore his father's old scarf, navy wool, frayed at the edges, but painstakingly mended, and carried his black stone openly in his palm. It glowed so fiercely, the light seeped between his fingers, casting strange shadows up his wrists. When he met Clara's gaze, his eyes were dark with determination. "Ready," he said, though his voice cracked on the word. Aveline had transformed the shop overnight. Lalia arrived as the last indigo faded from the eastern sky, her arms full of ghost-pale winter roses. Elliot came next, stomping snow from his boots in the doorway. As twilight deepened, Aveline began her preparations. "Take hands," Aveline instructed when the church bell tolled 11. Then the world softened. The shop walls became gauze, the teapot poured itself. Elliot made a sound like a wounded animal when his father stepped forward. Light exploded. Memories bloomed in the air between them, not flat images. A fishing trip at dawn, the lake steaming in the cold, the taste of stolen cookie dough, and shared laughter behind the kitchen door. A bedtime story read by flashlight under a blanket fort. Elliot sobbed openly now, his free hand pressed to his mouth. As the church bell began to toll midnight, the vision wavered. The circle broke. In the east, the sky paled to the color of steeped chamomile. The dawn following the solstice arrived like a held breath finally released. Pale gold light spilled through the tea shop windows, illuminating the remnants of their ritual, the wilted evergreens, the puddled candle wax, the winter roses now fully opened with petals like outstretched hands. Clara moved through the quiet space, her slippers whispering against floorboards, still warm from the stone's fading energy. Elliot slept curled in the window seat, his father's scarf tucked beneath his cheek. The vein of white light had spread since last night, now branching across the surface like a tree in winter. For remembering him. For letting him remember me. The black stone resting in his loosely curled palm. Its lightning vein pulsed gently with each rise and fall of his chest. She paused at the sight of the silver tray, her golden eyes widening slightly. Without speaking, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the blue stone, now shot through with delicate white filaments like mycelium. The teapot spout emitted a thin curl of steam, though no fire burned beneath it. "Well," she said softly, brushing flour from her apron. "It seems the shop has its own ideas about what comes next." She placed it beside Elliot's, completing the set. The stone's light pulsed in time with the teapot's quiet song, casting liquid patterns across the walls, shapes that almost, but not quite, resembled hands lifting cups in silent toast. Adeline had disappeared upstairs hours ago. The metal was cool, but the lines shimmered faintly, like sunlight on water. Marigold's final message echoed in her mind. "Keep pouring." Her vial box clutched tight to her chest, as if it had poured out more than just tea last night. The interior smelled of ozone and distant rain, but not before pressing a steaming mug into Clara's hands, something fortifying with ginger and thyme that still lingered on Clara's tongue. He blinked slowly, his fingers tightening around the stone as memory returned. For a long moment, he simply sat, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam. Then, with careful deliberation, he stood and walked to the counter where Clara stood. Walia was the first to return. She entered as morning birds began their chorus, carrying a basket of warm brioche that filled the shop with the scent of brown butter. Without a word, she began clearing the ritual remnants, her movement slow and reverent. When she lifted the silver tray that had held the stones, Her breath caught etched into the metal was a perfect outline of the teapot, as if it had burned its silhouette there during the night. "Look," Lilia whispered. Clara traced the etching with her fingertip. The teapot itself sat quietly on the counter, looking for all the world like ordinary porcelain. But when Clara lifted it, the weight was different, lighter. Elliot stirred as sunlight touched his face. "He said thank you," Elliot murmured, placing the black stone beside the teapot. Aveline descended the stairs then, her usual sharp edges softened by sleep. The 3 stones began to hum. Not the resonant chord of last night, but something quieter, a lullaby vibration that made the teacups on their hooks sway gently. Lelia set down her brioche. Outside, the first true sunrise of winter gilded the snowdrifts. The stone's light pulsed in time with the teapot's quiet song, casting liquid patterns across the wall, shapes that almost, but not quite, resembled hands lifting cups in silent toast. Winter tightened its grip in the weeks following the solstice, frosting the windows with delicate lacework that glowed blue at dawn. But inside the tea shop, something new was growing. Elliot's black stone now branched with white veins like a river delta seen from above. Drawn downstairs by the scent of bergamot that lingered in the stairwell, regardless of what teas they deserved the day before. This morning, the aroma was particularly strong, laced with something earthy and green beneath the citrus-like new growth pushing through frozen ground. Aveline's blue stone pulsed with golden filaments that shifted when no one was looking. The white stone, the first one left by an unknown visitor, had developed a rosy blush at its core, spreading outward like dawnlight. They sat together on the silver tray, humming softly whenever the teapot steamed, which was often these days. Their lights swirling together to cast dancing patterns across the jar. "What is it?" "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, arranging them in a vase near the stones. "Kept dreaming about these." Customers remarked on scents that shouldn't exist: fresh cut grass, cherry blossoms, rain-drenched earth. The teapot steamed continuously now, pouring teas that tasted of memories not yet made, honeysuckle and promise, apricot and sunlight, lavender and homecoming. "The creek behind my cottage won't thaw for weeks, that there they were, full buds in dead winter?" he asked incredulously. Though no flowers bloomed for months yet, the stones had changed. Clara found herself waking earlier each morning, its light reflecting in the glass jars of herbs, each one refracting the stone's light into miniature rainbows across the walls. The teapot, left unattended, had poured itself a cup of something golden that shimmered like liquid sunlight. Somewhere beneath the frozen earth, roots turned in their sleep, dreaming of green. She found Aveline already in the kitchen, grinding dried orange peel with a mortar and pestle. The blue stone glowed beside her on the work table. After the longest night comes the first remembering. After winter, the dreaming time. "You feel it too," Aveline said without looking up. "The shift." Aveline sifted the powdered peel through her fingers. "When winter still holds, but spring begins whispering underneath." She nodded to the window where icicles dripped despite the freezing temperature. "The stones know it first. Then the teapot, then..." She tapped Clara's chest lightly with orange-dusted fingers. "Those who listen." Clara touched the teapot's handle. It was warmer than usual, its surface shimmering with condensation that hadn't been there moments before. Marigold called it the between time. Elliot arrived just as the first customers began trickling in, his cheeks red from the cold. He carried a mason jar filled with dark soil and a single green shoot curling toward the light. "Found it growing by the river," he said, setting it on the counter beside the stones, in the exact spot where ... He trailed off, but Clara understood. Where he'd seen his father's shadow in the water. The shoot trembled as Elliot placed it down, its leaves unfurling slightly as if sighing in relief. The stone's humming intensified. Mr. Finch, their usual Tuesday customer, paused in the doorway, his nose twitching. "Is that ... lilac?" Lilia arrived then with arms full of willow branches, their silver buds soft as kitten fur. As the day unfolded, the shop filled with an impossible springtime warmth. At twilight, Clara noticed the frost flowers on the windows had melted into perfect teardrop shapes. Adeline traced the rim of the cup with one scarred finger. "Marigold's last lesson," she murmured. Outside, the icicles dripped faster, their music joining the stone's quiet song. Somewhere beneath the frozen earth, roots turned in their sleep, dreaming of green. The morning the world changed began with three extraordinary things. First, Clara woke to find her bedroom walls covered in living vines that hadn't been there the night before, delicate green tendrils with heart-shaped leaves that trembled when she exhaled. They smelled like the first warm day after winter, earthy and sweet. Second, when she descended the stairs, she found the tea shop already bathed in golden light. The three stones had migrated from their silver tray to form a triangle around the plant's base. Their lights, white, blue, and black now swirled together in the air above the blossom. "My hens started laying these at midnight," she said, setting one carefully beside the miraculous plant. The moment it touched the counter, the shell dissolved like sugar in tea. Tiny green shoots sprang up with audible pops, their leaves unfurling like children stretching awake. The stone's humming rose to a resonant chord that vibrated in Clara's bones, in the fillings of her teeth. Her silver hair floated around her face like a halo, and when she reached for Clara's hands, her skin was warm and solid. In the locket at her throat that had been her grandmother's, releasing swirls of mist that smelled like petrichor and freshly turned earth, the scars on her fingers shimmered like molten metal. It pulsed once warmly against his skin. Not just memory, but possibility. Lilia laughed when a vine curled affectionately around her wrist, its leaves brushing her knuckles with something like gratitude. Outside, the last of the snow melted in visible waves. "This was never just a shop," she murmured. "It's where the light gathers when the world forgets how to shine," revealing crocus shoots that pushed through the thawing earth with audible sighs of relief. The moment he touched the newborn stone at the flower's heart, it flared bright enough to cast their shadows against the wall shadows that moved independently, as if she held a beating heart made of porcelain. Through its smooth surface, she could feel the rhythm of the world waking from winter, bowing to one another in some ancient dance, just like she said it would, forming a miniature galaxy that cast prismatic reflections across the ceiling. The stones fell silent at last, their lights dimming to a gentle, contented glow. The first customer of the day, an elderly woman Clara had never seen before, paused on the threshold, her eyes widening at the transformed shop. She inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of growing things and something deeper, something like hope made tangible, coalescing into a human silhouette that stepped forward as gracefully as a dancer. Vines climbed the bookshelves with purposeful grace, bursting into flowers that changed color as they bloomed, from violet to peach to deepest ruby. The winter roses on the windowsill fruited suddenly, their swollen hips splitting to release seeds that floated through the air like dandelion wishes. Even the floorboards softened underfoot, moss growing between the cracks and velvety green patches, though dawn was still an hour away. Her scarred hands suspended over the glowing lights as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Her voice the sound of wind through young leaves, even when you didn't understand why. Her eyes, the exact shade of the blue stone, darted to Aveline's scarred hands, to Elliot's awestruck face, to Lilia's tear-streaked cheeks. All of you did. The morning light transformed her usual sharp edges into something softer, almost ethereal. Elliot stumbled in, still in his pajama pants under his winter coat, his hair sticking up in wild tufts. He froze mid-step when he saw his plant. "That's impossible," he breathed, his voice cracking. "It was 2 inches tall last night." When she turned to Clara, her golden eyes shone with unshed tears. The source sat glowing on the counter, Elliot its little riverbank shoot had transformed overnight into a lush plant with leaves like emerald-stained glass, their veins pulsing with liquid light. At its center bloomed a single white flower, its petals arranged in a perfect spiral that made Clara's eyes water to look at directly. Perfect twin to the one he carried in his pocket, but newborn and unmarked. Third, and perhaps most astonishing, Aveline stood before this arrangement. "It's happening," she whispered. The shop door burst open before Clara could respond. As if responding to his presence, the white flower trembled and turned toward him, its petals unfurling further to reveal a tiny black stone nestled at its center. Lalia arrived moments later, carrying a basket of eggs that glowed with their own inner light, their shells pearlescent in the strange dawn. Then the teapot began to pour itself. Not tea this time, that liquid sunlight thick and golden as honey, that overflowed its cup and spilled across the wooden counter. Where it touched the surface, the steam above the teapot thickened, marigold. Not as a ghost or memory, but as a woman woven from dappled sunlight and the scent of bergamot. "You kept pouring," Marigold said, around them. The shop underwent its own transformation. Elliot reached toward his plant with trembling fingers. "The bridge goes both ways now," Marigold whispered, pressing the now dormant stone into Elliot's palm. Aveline gasped as her scars faded from angry red to delicate silver traceries, like frost patterns on glass. When Clara lifted the teapot, her teapot, it felt different in her hands. Lighter, yes, but also more alive. Marigold smiled and pressed one translucent hand to the teapot side. Then she was gone, not vanished, but dissolved into the sunlight now pouring through every window, pooling on the floors like liquid gold. The bell above the door jingled. "Something different today," she requested, her voice trembling with wonder. Clara smiled and reached for the teapot. The first thing Clara noticed about the world after its changing was the silence. Not an absence of sound, but a different quality to it, as if the air itself had grown softer, more receptive. The morning after the miracle, she woke to find the vines around her bedpost, now the scars on her hands. Once angry and red, now shimmered like gold leaf in candlelight. Resonant thrum then traveled up her arm to settle behind her breastbone. Images blossomed behind her closed eyelids. "It's speaking," she murmured as Clara approached. Not with words, with dot-dot reverberations. The plant trembled, showering them with pollen that sparkled like crushed diamonds in the morning light. She pressed Clara's hand to the wood. "You have to see the riverbank," he breathed, pulling Clara outside. The mushroom released a puff of spores that formed shapes in the air, brief, flickering images of people Clara almost recognized. One looked like her grandmother, young and smiling. Sported tiny blue flowers that glowed faintly in the pre-dawn dark. "I dreamed of this place," the woman confessed. "There was a vine-covered doorway, and someone told me to follow the roots." She sipped her tea, a blend the teapot had made that morning from unknown leaves, and began to cry quiet, joyful tears. "This tastes like my mother's kitchen. Reach not just through the physical earth, but through the soil of memory itself. Their scent like vanilla and freshly turned earth." Downstairs, the tea shop hummed with new energy. Somewhere beneath their feet, roots hummed with stories waiting to be sipped. The transformed plant, now grown to the size of a small shrub, had migrated overnight to the center of the room, its roots pushing gently through the floorboards without damaging them. The stones nestled among those roots pulsed in time with the teapot's quiet steam, their lights casting prismatic patterns that shifted like living stained glass. "Marigold's final lesson," she said, nodding to the plant. "Some bridges aren't for crossing, they're for remembering and being remembered." So thick and soft it muffled their footsteps. The river itself ran clear as glass, its surface dotted with water lilies that bloomed despite the winter chill. And there, where Elliot had first found his miraculous sprout, stood a circle of mushrooms with caps that glowed the same blue as Adeline's scent stone. Adeline was already there, kneeling before the plant with her palms flat against the floor. The vibration moved through Clara's fingers first to deep, a network of roots spreading beneath the town, glowing like the stones, Marigold walking those subterranean pathways, her silver hair floating as if underwater doors made of twisted vines. Slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of other tea shops in other towns, Clara gasped as the vision released her. Elliot arrived with dirt under his nails and wonder in his eyes. Where the frozen path should have been, a carpet of moss now grew. They appeared at dawn, Elliot whispered, crouching to touch one. Back in the shop, Lilia was serving tea to their first customer, an elderly woman who clutched her cup with trembling hands. As the day unfolded, more strangers arrived, each carrying a similar story of dreams and doorways. The teapot poured unique blends for everyone. For a war veteran, something smoky and rich that made him whisper, "The cafe near the base in Berlin, ... For a teenage girl, a floral infusion that had her gasping, "This is Grandma Rose's perfume." For a pair of twins, identical cups of chocolatey mate that made them simultaneously exclaim, "Campfire Summers." By twilight, Clara realized what was happening. The plant wasn't just growing, it was connecting. Its roots, she now understood. Aveline pressed a steaming cup into Clara's hands as they closed for the night. Outside, the first fireflies of winter danced around the glowing mushrooms, their light echoing the stone's rhythm. Somewhere beneath their feet, roots hummed with stories waiting to be sipped. The morning after the world changed, Clara woke to find the vines around her window had bloomed overnight. Tiny blue flowers glowed softly along their tendrils, their petals pulsing like gentle fireflies in the dawn light. When she touched one, warmth spread through her fingertips, carrying with it the faintest whisper of laughter, her grandmother's laughter, from a memory she'd nearly forgotten. Downstairs, the tea shop hummed with quiet energy. The transformed plant at the center of the room had grown taller overnight, its emerald leaves now broad as teacups. The plant trembled in response, releasing a shower of golden pollen that sparkled like crushed sunlight as it drifted to the floor, their surfaces etched with delicate silver veins that shimmered when the light hit them just right. The mushroom released a puff of iridescent spores that swirled in the air. Dad told stories about her planting trees by this river, forming fleeting shapes, a woman kneading dough, hands planting a sapling, lips whispering to the earth. The three stones, Elliot's black one, Aveline's blue, and the mysterious white nestled among its roots, their lights intertwined in a slow, rhythmic dance. But many have been sleeping for generations. Her golden eyes met Clara's. They need waking. Aveline knelt beside the plant, her scarred hands pressed flat against the floorboards. Painted on what looked like pressed leaves rather than paper, it shimmered with strange, shifting inks. Others ... She touched her scars, now delicate as lace. "These will help me find them." Where the specks landed on Aveline's map, faint teacup symbols flickered weakly to life. His stone pulsing in time with some unheard rhythm. His lips moved silently, as if in conversation. "I'll plant it where the roots are weakest," she promised. Outside, the mushrooms glowed brighter, as if in approval. "Root tender's gift," she said, handing Clara a sprig of flowering thyme. "Some hear the songs beneath the soil." His father did too, though he never understood what it meant. Tiny teacup symbols marked locations across the world, some glowing vibrantly, others faded nearly to invisibility. The once angry marks now gleamed like gold filigree in the morning light. The blue stone sat beside her, its filaments now stretched into delicate strands resembling mycelium. Without a word, Clara pressed a small clay pot into Aveline's hands inside. A cutting from the plant, its leaves already glowing faintly. "It's speaking," she murmured as Clara approached, his boots leaving damp prints on the wood. "You have to see the riverbank," he breathed, grabbing Clara's hand. Not in words, but in vibrations, like a heartbeat echoing through the roots. She guided Clara's hand to the wood. The moment Clara's fingers touched the floor, the images came, a network of glowing roots spreading beneath the town, branching out like liquid light through dark soil. Marigold walking those subterranean pathways, her silver hair floating around her as if she moved underwater, her hands brushing the roots like old friends. Doorways formed of twisted vines, slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of other tea shops in distant towns, some bustling with life, others dark and waiting. Clara gasped as the vision released her. Elliot burst in then, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Where frozen earth should have been, a carpet of velvety moss now grew. So thick and soft it muffled their footsteps as they approached the water's edge. The river itself ran clear as glass, its surface dotted with water lily that had no business blooming in winter. And there, precisely where Elliot had first found his, miraculous sprout stood a perfect circle of mushrooms with caps that glowed the same celestial blue as Aveline's stone. They appeared at dawn, Elliot whispered, crouching to touch one. "That's my great-grandmother," Elliot said, voice thick. Back in the shop, Aveline had unfurled an ancient-looking map across the counter. "Marigold left this," Aveline said, tracing a glowing cluster in the Scottish Highlands. "The roots connect them all." Clara's chest tightened. "You're leaving." Aveline nodded, rolling up the map with care. "This shop is strong now." As if in response, the central plant shivered, releasing another shower of golden pollen. That evening, as Clara prepared tea for their now daily visitors, she noticed Elliot crouched by the plant's roots. Lilia caught Clara watching and smiled. At midnight, Clara found Aveline packing by candlelight. Aveline tucked it carefully beside the map. "I'll plant it where the roots are weakest," she promised. Outside, the mushrooms glowed brighter, as if in approval. The morning Aveline departed, the shop exhaled a slow, deliberate release that made the hanging teacups chime without being touched. Clara woke to find the vines around her window had woven themselves into intricate patterns overnight. The 3 stones nestled in its roots pulsed in alternating rhythms, Elliot's black stone with its lightning veins, the mysterious white stone now glowing peach, and Aveline's abandoned blue stone whose filaments still twitched occasionally like sleeping fingers. The teapot sat steaming on the counter, though no fire burned beneath it, its surface beaded with condensation that tasted of the sea when Clara licked her finger. Their new leaves edged in gold like gilded pages in an ancient book. His hand disappeared up to the wrist, his fingers disturbing the vision like stones dropped in water. "It's warm," he murmured, like afternoon sun through glass. When he withdrew, his fingertips glittered with golden pollen. When she breathed in, where it touched the wood, tiny flowers sprouted, their petals unfolding to reveal faces Clara almost recognized. Where solid walls should have been, a living archway of woven vines now curved toward the ceiling. Through its leaves, Clara glimpsed movement, a sunlit kitchen with yellow curtains where a dark-haired woman stood at a stove. "I can smell them, though. I've never left this town," stirring a pot that sent up spirals of juniper-scented steam. The air carried the faintest trace of salt and peat smoke scents that didn't belong to their landlocked town. "Ocean waves," he said, licking salt from his lips. "And I'm holding a stone I haven't found yet." Outside, the first snowdrop pushed through frozen earth by the shop's doorstep, its white petals glowing faintly in the gathering dark. Marigold only managed this once before the stones went dormant. She began portioning the precious liquid into tiny cups no bigger than thimbles. Downstairs, the central plant had grown taller, its trunk now thick as Clara's wrist. Lilia arrived as the first winter sunlight pierced the windows. The white stone flared in response, projecting one final vision onto the wall, carrying a basket of impossible blackberries that dripped juice the color of twilight. As the roots touched earth, blue light spread underground like liquid lightning, racing towards something vast and slumbering beneath the hills. My daughter's singing at her graduation, she explained, though her babe slept in her arms. She's wearing the pearls my mother hid before the war. From the coastal bush near my sister's home, she said, though her sister lived 3 days' journey away. The vision sharpened as she spoke, revealing her grandmother younger than Clara ever knew her, sitting across from Marigold at a wooden table. Between them sat a teapot shaped like a songbird, its spout slightly chipped. They were laughing over cups of something that steamed pink in the sunlight, their fingers stained with what looked like crushed berries. Eveline's already stirring the roots there. She plucked one berry and held it to the light, revealing tiny star-shaped seeds that glowed faintly blue. The back room had transformed overnight. "That's my grandmother's kitchen," Clara whispered. Elliot reached through the vine archway first. The teapot chose that moment to pour itself a thin stream of the same pink liquid from the vision that pooled on the counter before Clara could catch it. A man who would someday mend her broken sign in the rain. A child who would bring her honey from hives not yet built. An older version of herself pouring tea for someone just out of view. Lilia caught a droplet on her finger and touched it to her tongue. "Future tea," she declared. The customers that day experienced miracles in miniature. Mr. Finch sipped his drop and suddenly straightened, his milky eyes clearing. "The lavender fields," he breathed. The young mother from the bakery tasted hers and burst into tears. Elliot drank his portion in one gulp, then stared at his palms. At twilight, Clara discovered the first spring bud on the plant, a tiny golden furled thing that pulsed when touched. Aveline, standing on a windswept cliff, planting Clara's gifted cutting beside a ruined stone wall. The teapot hummed a lullaby none of them recognized, but all somehow knew by heart. Outside, the first snowdrop pushed through frozen earth by the shop's doorstep, its white petals glowing faintly in the gathering dark. The morning the world turned, Clara woke to spring singing through her window. Frost still painted the town beyond, his boots leaving prints in the unexpected grass growing around the doorstep. He carried his black stone in one hand and a leather satchel in the other. The townspeople came bearing gifts that hummed with quiet magic, his eyes alight with something between excitement and sorrow. "The roots showed me the way," he said, placing his stone among the plant's roots, where it glowed like a piece of the night sky. "There's a seaside town where the stones have been sleeping for 50 years. Eveline's waiting near the old lighthouse." Elliot's black stone dissolved into the roots like ink in water, its lightning veins spreading through the plant's branches. The white stone floated upward. The brew tasted different to each of them. Clara swore it held her grandmother's laughter. Lilia sighed at the taste of her first garden's roses, and Elliot grinned at the salt-kissed flavor of journeys yet taken, embedding itself in the largest golden bud, while Aveline's blue stone split into countless fragments that rained down as tiny sapphire seeds, filling the shop with floating seeds that shone like captured starlight. Through the cascade, Clara saw them, figures both familiar and new, some solid, some translucent with eyes full of constellations, all raising cups and silent toast. But around the tea shop, the earth had warmed snowdrops and crocuses pushing through soil that should have been frozen solid. Clara lifted her cup as dawn's first light touched the windows. As the doorbell chimed for the first customer of the new world, the plant's roots humming beneath her feet, its branches heavy with fruit that hadn't been there moments before, their surfaces dusted with edible gold. "For the journey," she said, tucking them into Elliot's bag alongside a vial of the future tea. The cake smelled of lemon and thyme, the exact scent from Clara's vision of her grandmother's kitchen, their petals glistening with dew that sparkled like liquid sunlight. The plant at the shop's center now stood tall as a young tree, its stem wrapped in cloth woven from Aveline's golden scar threads. The moment it touched his skin, the leaves unfurled, revealing veins that pulsed blue in time with the distant tide, its bark patterned with silver whorls that pulsed when touched. releasing a shower of golden pollen that formed shapes in the air, a winding coastal path, a crumbling stone wall, a teapot half buried in sand. The vision held just long enough for them all to see Avelina's silhouette waiting at the end of the path, her hands glowing with that familiar blue light, its branches heavy with golden buds ready to burst. Elliot arrived at dawn. Leia emerged from the back room carrying a tray of honey cakes shaped like tea leaves. The farewell ritual began at midday. Mr. Finch brought a spool of silver thread spun from actual moonlight. The young mother offered a handkerchief embroidered with constellations that shifted when unfolded. Even the reticent postman contributed a seashell that whispered ocean waves when held to the ear. Clara placed her own gift in Elliot's hands, cutting from the plant. As Elliot shouldered his pack, the plant shivered. At sunset, the stones began their final transformation. That night, they drank the last of the memory tea beneath the plant's glowing branches. When the church bells tolled midnight, the golden buds burst open all at once. The teapot poured itself one final time that night, a rich amber liquid that steamed despite being cold to the touch. Outside, the seasons balanced perfectly on the threshold winter's last frost, melting into spring's first green. Inside, the shop breathed, alive and waiting, as the doorbell chimed for the first customer of the new world. The morning the seasons balanced, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through leaves that hadn't existed at bedtime. The vine outside her window had grown overnight, its new tendrils forming an archway of living wood around her doorframe. His boots leaving prints in the sodden grass surrounding the shop. He carried his traveling pack and a sprig of sea lavender that smelled of distant shores. "The roots showed me the way last night," he said, pressing his palm to the tree's bark. The black stone pulsed in response, projecting a vision across the wall, a crumbling lighthouse, tidal pools glowing blue. "My grandmother's pattern," she said. The stars shifted when tilted toward light. The tree shuddered. They drank the last of the memory tea beneath the glowing branches, each tasting something different, releasing a shower of pollen that coalesced into Elliot's journey, a winding coastal path, a stone wall choked with vines, a cellar door half buried in sand. As Clara lifted her cup, the first true day of spring dawned outside. The doorbell chimed. Somewhere down the coast, a cutting took root in salty earth, and the shop, alive with memory and promise, welcomed its next customer with a steam-kissed window and the scent of something wonderful brewing. Winter's last frost melting into dew. The vision held just long enough for them to see the blue stone fragments in Aveline's hands flaring to life. Aveline waiting on windswept cliffs. Through it drifted the scent of salt and blooming citrus impossible, this far inland, yet unmistakable. Downstairs, the plant stood transformed. No longer just a shrub, but a proper tree now, filling the air with floating seeds that shone like captured starlight. Through the shimmering haze, Clara saw them, all the shop's visitors, past and future, some solid, some translucent with eyes full of constellations, all raising cups in silent salute. Its silver bark trunk thick as Clara's waist, its branches heavy with golden fruit that glowed like captured sunlight. "Moon water," he rasped, "for when you're homesick." When Elliot held it to his ear, the shop's familiar hum echoed from within. The stones had rearranged themselves, Elliot's black one embedded in the trunk like a knot of polished obsidian, the white stone cradled in the tree's highest fork, while Aveline's blue stone had fractured into countless fragments that now twinkled among the leaves like sapphire fireflies. Elliot arrived at first light. Lilia emerged from the kitchen bearing a going-away feast, honey cakes shaped like tea leaves, blackberry preserves from the miraculous bush, a loaf of bread kneaded with future tea. The townspeople came bearing gifts that shimmered with quiet magic. Mr. Finch presented a thimble-sized silver cup. The young mother pressed a handkerchief embroidered with constellations. Even the postman contributed a conch shell that whispered the shop's teapot song when held close. As Clara wrapped the final gift, at sunset, the farewell ritual began. Clara her grandmother's laughter and lemon cakes, Laia her first garden's prize roses, Elliot silk spray and stone fruit from trees not yet planted. When the church bells tolled midnight, the golden fruit split open simultaneously. The teapot poured itself one final serving, an amber brew that steamed despite being cool to the touch. Inside, the tree hummed a lullaby older than the town. The doorbell chimed. Somewhere down the coast, a cutting took root in salty earth, and the shop, alive with memory and promise, welcomed its next customer with a steam-kissed window and the scent of something wonderful brewing.